A through line of that work and our next panel is accountability, right? Announcing that we want to, or even that we will invest in alternative response is one thing, but what is actually happening on the ground, how many calls, what kinds of responses, how to scale, the devil is always in the details. So we're going to hear more about this in our next panel. If the panelists want to start coming up, we've got a big panel, so come on over here and take your seats as I'm doing a little bit of introduction. The beauty of this convening so far is that in 3 years of hosting this event, we've managed to bring it to 3 different major cities, each with a unique set of services, challenges, and successes in the alternative response landscape. Last year in New York, we were intentional about using the opportunity to bring local New York alternative responders to join us, both to learn from this robust group of national experts and to share their perspectives on New York's challenges at the time. And now New York has a new mayor who has made a public commitment to, yep, all right, one for Zohar Mamdani, who has made a public commitment to scaling and making permanent the crisis response landscape. We're also joined by some of the current and future members of the mayoral administration, despite not being in New York again this year. So just to see how that moves from year to year, people are still interested, people are still invested. And this year, we hope to do something similar. We're trying to be even more intentional about not just involving Chicago in this discussion, but providing ourselves in this room, all of the resources that come with being in this room, to the city of Chicago to ensure that they can scale up their care program and crisis response landscape writ large. We're also thrilled to have actual members of the care team here today. We have a caravan downstairs. I believe it's going to be here until the afternoon, so big shout out to the care folks. Definitely go check out the caravan. As soon as I'm done emceeing or when y'all go off to workshops, I'm going to go down because I want to check it out. At the Policing Project, our Chicago connections and roots run deep. We've been involved in the Neighborhood Policing Initiative for many years. We've worked closely with district counselors and other community members, and we've had huge support from Jose, from DeAndre, from Freya on the team doing that work. We've also conducted a community safety assessment in North Lawndale with support from Therese, Michael Thompson, and a number of the North Lawndale community members who are actually here today. Shout out to North Lawndale. And back in 2024, we released a report evaluating Chicago's opportunities to expand community policing and crisis response programs. And we've worked with a number of stakeholders in the city to improve public safety outcomes here in Chicago. So it seemed right to have a plenary focused on Chicago's path to alternative response and all of the challenges that come along with it. And so I'm excited to welcome a diverse array of speakers. Oh, yes, you left the seat that I wanted for me, thank you. All who have many years of experience leading the charge to support the continuum of care for Chicago. I'll be your moderator for today's plenary, and in addition to asking our speakers to introduce themselves very briefly, 60 seconds or less, I've been tasked, of course, as the only non-Chicagoan here to give a very short overview of the existing landscape in Chicago. So the actual Chicagoans will have to correct me if I make any errors, but I'll start just briefly with a sort of background on care and timeline. And I'm trying to be better about not using acronyms and not assuming that everyone knows what everything is, so I'm going to try to define what the acronyms are. Someone asked me yesterday what PSAP was, and I was like, yeah, that not everyone knows exactly what every acronym means. So CARE is an acronym, Crisis Assistance, Response, and Engagement. It is housed within the Chicago Department of Public Health, which is another acronym, CDPH. Someone used that on me the other day, and I had to think about what that was. And CARE works to ensure, this is directly from their website, that Chicagoans having socio-emotional distress or experiencing mental health crises are assisted on site by teams of behavioral health professionals and offered resources to address unmet needs. CARE was started in 2021 as a pilot initiative within the Chicago Police Department, first dispatching co-response teams, police, paramedics, and mental health clinicians. 2024, the program transitioned to a non-police model and moved administratively to CDPH. CARE teams respond to 911 calls Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. CARE teams are made up of a mental health clinician and an emergency medical technician. And CARE-eligible calls are those with a mental health and socio-emotional distress component where the caller has no weapons, no violent tendencies, no active substance use or overdose, no active plan to take their life by suicide, and no medical issue or active threats to themselves or others. Care teams can be requested directly via 911 or via email for non-crisis clinicians to respond to within 72 hours. There's also a number of additional crisis hotlines serving Chicago. There's a 24-hour 211-988 suicide and crisis hotline. There's a NAMI Chicago helpline. There is a multilingual domestic violence hotline for Chicago. And Chicago's got a number of mobile crisis response programs, as well as living room crisis respite centers. And Chicago PD also has CIT trained officers. Okay, so that's the sort of basic overview, extremely basic. I know there's a lot of context missing, but I tried to just give a quick overview there, and I know the panelists will fill in a lot of the gaps. So why don't we've got 6 amazing panelists here. Why don't we just go down the line? Tiffany, we can start with you. Just a very brief intro and sort of one sentence about your connection to alternative response in Chicago.
Good morning. Okay, it's on. Morning. Good morning. I am Tiffany Patton Burnside. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I am the Senior Director of Crisis Services with the Chicago Department of Public Health. I oversee the clinicians and day-to-day operations of the CARE program.
Good morning. I'm Matt Richards. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm currently Deputy Chief of Staff for Health for Cook County Board President Tony Preckwinkle. I used to be the Deputy Commissioner for Behavioral Health for the City of Chicago and used to work with Tiffany on CARE.
Hello, my name is Sully Peterson Quinn. I use they or she pronouns, and I'm the campaign coordinator for the Grassroots Alliance for Police Accountability. We are a coalition of citywide nonprofits, including the Policing Project is one of our members, and we do a lot of work supporting the Empowering Citizens for Public Safety Ordinance implementation, which I think we may get into a little bit later, and supporting our city elected officials who do police accountability and alternative response work.
Hello, my name is Jenny Schaefer. I am one of the elected officials that does the police accountability work. I'm a district council member in the 19th district. And one of the things that district council was really created to do is to make sure that communities have a voice in public safety and policing. And we hear constantly from our constituents that they want to see police resources used more efficiently and effectively. So our district council really started to get involved with how can we use alternate response to achieve that goal.
Good morning, buenos dias. Dr. Arturo Carrillo, I am Deputy Mayor for Health and Human Services. Before that, I was a co-founder of the Collaborative for Community Wellness, led the Treatment Not Trauma campaign, and really brought together grassroots organizations to create what we have now in the CARE program. I'm a licensed clinical social worker by training and lifelong Chicagoan.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jessica Jimeno, and I'm the mental health policy analyst at Access Living. Since 1980, we've successfully championed the rights of people with disabilities in healthcare, housing, transportation, and education at the city, state, and national levels. The majority of the consumers we serve live in Chicago, and my relationship to alternative care is that Access Living wrote a bill called CESA, the Community Emergency Services and Supports Act, after our community galvanized following the death of a 15-year-old African-American boy named Stephon Watts. He had autism, and he was fatally shot by the Calumet police. The bill was signed into law by Governor Pritzker in 2021, and we're now in the pre-implementation phase.
Thank you to our panelists, and great job on being timely and concise. That doesn't always work, and it was a risk to ask you guys to introduce yourselves, but you nailed it. So we'll jump right into some questions, and I think most important to kind of set the stage, especially considering how many details I probably left out. I want to talk about before CARE and how we got here. So I'll come to Matt, and then maybe Arturo and Sully can jump in as well. So Chicago communities were already kind of doing this work, and Arturo talks a little bit about the Treatment Not Trauma, his past doing that advocacy. There's a grassroots ecosystem both for alternative response and violence interruption. So tell us about how community buy-in kind of helped shape where Chicago is today, and I'd love to hear sort of an honest reflection about what has gotten lost in translation as grassroots has moved into government, or as people have gone between both of those spaces. So maybe Matt, if you want to start us off, and then
I think it's always important to talk about the fact that alternative response has been happening in communities for decades, right? It has a history of mutual aid, community-based organizations, et cetera. So in Chicago, I think when you're talking about alternate response, you need to talk about where we are with the community violence intervention infrastructure and where we were with the Chicago Police Department consent decree, because those two things had a lot to do with alternate response. So the city entered into a consent decree related to excessive use of force in the Chicago Police Department in 2019, and there were a set of recommendations related to how the city was going to change how it responded to people in behavioral health crisis. And one of those recommendations called for the development of alternate response teams. The city accepted that recommendation in 2019. So I was the Deputy Commissioner of Behavioral Health at that time. I was told to start working on developing a recommendation with the other agencies about how we would do that. Parallel to that, we now have probably the most evolved, or at least one of the most evolved, community violence intervention infrastructures in the United States. That really started off as folks doing the work in community, often unfunded. It became funded through philanthropy. And then in 2019 and 2020, we really started to use government money. And once you start using government money to pay for things and trying to incorporate community infrastructure into government systems, we have a whole different set of questions at play, right? Oops. So we have to start requiring people to report data they've never reported before, including about individual level people. You have to start answering questions from first responders about how can we trust the community responders that we are working with? What's their training? How do we know we can share sensitive information with them? Can we develop protocols that include timely response time when we have violent incidents in the community, and getting community-based organizations information so they can get to the scenes of shootings extremely quickly? It took us 5 years to do that with CVI, right? So we're now at a point where we're funding CVI at well over $50 million a year with government money. We're seeing that CVI reduces violence in the communities it works in by 20 to 30%. We're able to tell you in a neighborhood how many people in that neighborhood would benefit from CVI. And we're able to make predictions when we make a level of investment in a neighborhood, what difference it's going to make in terms of reducing violence in that neighborhood. Okay, let's compare that to alternate response. We started funding and started to think about developing alternate response in 2019. It didn't start until 2021. We had lots of community-based organizations, community mental health centers, CCBHCs, that had their own crisis lines, right? Everybody's familiar with all of that. But the practice of now having a new workforce that you're trying to fold into a heavily unionized public safety apparatus that's built around a fundamentally different set of assumptions about safety. The 911 system is basically historically a police dispatch service. And trying to get people to now think about there's a whole wide range of emergencies that people have, and many of them are not immediate public safety, fires, or immediate health emergencies. So we need a new workforce. And Arturo and other folks who at that time were doing community organizing, and I'll let him talk about that part of it, there was the outside of government push to say you need to develop that workforce. Because when you don't, first of all, people don't get their needs met, but also horrible things happen. Inside government, we had to try to figure out how do we develop protocols that the city lawyers are going to allow us to do, that the unions feel comfortable with, that the 911 operators will actually utilize. And so I think we're 5 years into that journey. We can talk more about where we are in terms of the opportunities and what's left to be done, but it's a heavy lift in big cities to get this done. I think a lot of you who are in smaller and mid-majors are leading the work, and we're really trying to look and iterate on what you're teaching us.
Yeah. So yeah, well, first off, welcome to Chicago. Chicago is a very political city, right? It's also a neoliberal city, right? And I lecture on this. I could talk about the hollowing out of the state and the state function to provide the supports to communities that are at most need. Chicago once had 19 public mental health centers. Think about public libraries, but like with clinicians who are there to serve people in community. Mayor Daley closed 7 of the 19 centers, leaving 12. Mayor Rahm Emanuel closes another 7, leaving 5. If it weren't for community organizing, for people calling out the names of those who died because those centers were closed, right? That legacy, that fight would have not prevented, would not have prevented the closure of the remaining 5. We still have those 5. So at least in Chicago, we have something to point to. We say there's public infrastructure that remains to offer free mental health services. Because if you don't have that, then what's the alternative? We have the largest mental health provider in the entire country. Can anyone name what that is? Cook County Jail, absolutely right. Right, this is a system that designs, right, the lack of investment and over-policing in the same neighborhoods. And this is the data speaking, right? The areas of the city where public mental health centers were closed were the areas of the city where the most 911 behavioral health related dispatch calls were coming from. So community organized. Community said, yes, absolutely, the murder of Laquan McDonald should never have happened. And because of the consent decree, we have to create the alternatives, right? But community called for that alternative to be a non-police alternative. At the time, Mayor Lightfoot proposed a co-responder model as the alternative crisis response. Hard stop. That was it. Community organized. Alderwoman Rosana Rodriguez Sanchez, who's another chairwoman of the Committee of Health and Human Relations, in City Council worked with community organizers, community organizations. We have a leader here, Cheryl Miller. Hands up for all my CCW people in the room. All of us were in community pushing for the non-police alternative. And then, with community negotiating with City Council, the non-police pilot alternative model was also established at the same time. So now you had an opportunity to test the system. And what we saw was that the public health model works, right? The public health approach to crisis response is just as effective, if not more effective. So in that, right, we have a mayor who runs on a platform to not only establish non-police crisis response, right, adapted that into his mayoral platform, but also worked and continues to work under the premise of co-governance. So the same people like myself who were outside are now working inside to make this a reality and expand it citywide. We just announced that 2 weeks ago. So one of the things that we see now is government thinking about what is the role of the state. Every one of the care workers are city employees. CDPH staff run the program. CDPH staff run the public mental health centers, right? And Mayor Brandon Johnson just reopened an additional 2 mental health centers. So, you know, when I talk to social workers, when I teach social workers, I challenge us to envision a system of care that is embedded in our system of governance in the same way that we already think about other institutions that are already funded by our tax dollars, right? And so in this room collectively, right, we're here to create that alternative and think about how we can provide the proper investment and the proper care in areas of the city that, again, have been disinvested in, and provide social workers the quality jobs to provide that care in those areas of highest need.
Sully, do you want to jump in before we go over to implementation?
Yeah, just a few additional thoughts, and I think going off of what Matt sort of led with, that you know, community violence intervention and alternative response are like deeply intuitive ideas for community. They arrive at these solutions very organically and very naturally. Trying to find the people closest to the problem are often the closest to the solution, and seeing how this rich history in Chicago of community violence intervention was initially sort of picked up by philanthropy and now by the city is an exciting sort of evolution of this project. And to give a little bit of context for what may be helpful for future discussions around implementation, in 2021, Chicago passed the Empowering Citizens for Public Safety Ordinance, and it created 2 sort of institutions in Chicago. First, a citywide commission that informs police policy, and also elected district councils, which are civilian elected officials in each of Chicago's 22 police districts. So 66 elected district councilors across the entire city, 3 in each of the 22 districts. And these district counselors, Jenny being among them, are responsible for a lot of advocacy, to the city for expanding alternative response and fighting for expansion to the CARE program, fighting for the Treatment Not Trauma campaign. But also use their district council meetings as venues for collaborative solutions to public safety concerns at the most local level, which sort of comes back to like one thing that I have really learned and really enjoyed about working with the district councils and attending district council meetings across the city is district councils are highlighting and bringing attention to many of these historic organizations that have been deeply rooted in the community and have been doing community violence intervention for decades. They give special presentations at district council meetings. They're connecting to community members, and this is the city now playing a role in sort of closing the loop and now connecting community members directly to these organizations, which is I think really exciting. I think we have tracked I think nearly 200 different community organizations across every corner of the city who have presented at district council meetings. And sometimes we've got a lot of folks going to those meetings, sometimes we have a smaller number of people going to those meetings, but every single meeting where a community member can connect with these organizations is a step in the right direction and makes a little difference, So seeing how this apparatus can connect community directly to those organizations is, I think, really exciting. And I think part of what this system is sort of, one of the questions we're trying to answer is, as this system of, community violence interruption or alternative response becomes more of a city institution, is community, ready to trust that it can be done as well at the city level as it can be done by like community organizations that have established things like credibility, that have established things like trust, and I think that there are all of these ways in which the city has to be much more careful, with respect to things like unions and standardized practices that all make a lot of sense, but also sort of to that end, like there is a lot of earned respect and trust with these organizations that the city is now trying to replicate, and trying to figure out like how we can forge strong trust and forge a strong credibility with these efforts is a real challenge that I think we'll get into with implementation. But yeah, those are my thoughts there.
Yeah. So I want to get to Tiffany because I think the sort of setting the stage of the TLDR that I'm hearing is Chicago's complicated. It's politically charged. There's been decades of disinvestment on the mental health, behavioral health support side, and there is a really galvanized and strong and thoughtful advocacy community that's been pushing to see that reinvestment happen, and that is sort of the transition that's occurring right now. That is hard to implement, I think, is maybe the short version summary of that. So I'd love to hear, Tiffany, we hear folks say this is what we want and this is what we, as communities or as elected officials, but then there are folks who are actually tasked with the implementation. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about your experience, like what kind of openness, what did the stakeholders look like during this pilot program, and how has that changed as we've transitioned into CARE, now most recently announced as citywide, but how has that looked over the last few years?
Loud. It's been very loud, very chaotic, very noisy. There have been voices coming from every direction, advocacy, political spaces, the staff doing the work, the people receiving the services. It's just been a whirlwind. Expectations that were set, unrealistic or realistic, people not understanding the systems with which we have to operate within, people not understanding that this space, this work that we're doing, we're the new kids on the block coming into a space that's hundreds of years old, and we're stepping in as the babies thinking, we just gonna do all the things. We want all of the pie, we want the whole pie. We thought we had the recipe, we want the pie, we don't want a slice. or at least that's what people thought we wanted. When reality is there's enough work to go around and there are enough people in the space who need help, and we are able to be that right resource when necessary. And so being able to pick apart what the needs were, not just the needs of the people, but hearing what the advocates had to say, because their voice was the representation of the clients that we serve. So how do we hear them and then implement in a space that wasn't very welcoming or inviting for us? How do we then also hear our police and fire partners and trying to maintain being in their space and not taking up space? And that's not easy to do when we have to actually take up space. They gave us a corner and we needed a room. So how do we be the room? With my mighty few staff members showing up, how they show up, when they show up, where they show up, joining the advocates, talking to the advocates, saying, hey, you're not aware that it's what's going on behind the scenes. We appreciate you advocating for us, but the reality is we need your voice over here as well. And being able to be thought partners in that space. I'm very thankful to Jenny. Jenny and I have become like this in that space because Jenny can say, I can say the things to Jenny that I can't say anywhere else, and Jenny can go into the advocacy space and say, hey, you know, the care team actually needs somebody down in Springfield to talk about how they can become considered first responders so that they get protected the same way police and fire get protected when they go outside. So there's a space for that. And my team is worried about that. So let me talk to someone who has a voice that we can't go and do that. Partnership within this space. So yes, we can be adversarial in the world because that's truly how it had been at one point, but how do you then reach across the divide and realize we all have the same common goal to get this thing done, to be able to provide support for those people who are at their worst day and time of their life? And where do we all fit into this puzzle?
I just want to, this is a little bit of a curveball, but I just want to have you guys say a quick word about the relationship. I mean, when you're working on implementation of new programs, you find your champions frequently in government, like the apolitical, in air quotes, folks in government. But there's also, to your point just now, Tiffany, you find champions who are elected in their own right. And I think that the relationship of district councilors in Chicago is pretty unique. So maybe, Jenny, do you want to just say it before I turn to you for the sort of non-mental health program that we're looking at? Do you just want to say a quick word about sort of how district councilors came to be and how you and Tiffany got connected?
Yeah, sure. So, district councilors were created to be the community voice for public safety and police accountability. And community doesn't care about politics. Community doesn't care about who wants this and who wants that. Community wants to see a thing get done. I came from community. I was never expected myself to ever be in an elected official role.
Those are the best kinds.
And so I come with that approach. And so hearing the need and seeing the common goal has really been able to help us facilitate to get to the things that we needed to get done.
Yeah, and I think that's a good kind of starting point for thinking beyond, thinking about all of the different kinds of responses that are under the umbrella of alternative response, right? People immediately think of mental health crisis, but one of the things that Jenny and some of her colleagues who are district councilors are thinking about is exploring ways to handle other kinds of calls for service, like parking enforcement. And that's something the Policing Project has been, intimately involved in at the national level and really advocating for folks thinking about traffic enforcement broadly as not necessarily something that's exclusively under the purview of police. So talk a little bit about how you're envisioning this kind of a program working in Chicago and how it may shift expectations of community response and government services.
Yeah, so just to kind of ground this conversation, our district council, my counselor, Amarillo Garcia, who's here, FOIA'd all the calls for service that came into our call center. And we found that across Chicago, about 8% of all calls were related to parking violations. We also know, so that was surprising, right? And we also know that we have a department right now, the Department of Finance, who has parking enforcement aid to go out and they basically are given a route every day and go around and write tickets around the route. to us, it made a lot of sense. Why are we having our police officers being the ones to respond to these massive amounts of parking violations? They're low priority, they don't get to them very quickly. That frustrates community. Community, if you have if you have someone parked in your grandma's handicap spot, you want that car removed quickly and addressed quickly, right? So we thought, why don't we create this new position? It was really important for us to do it collaboratively. So what we did was we brought together people from the police department, people from the Department of Finance, and people from our call center to talk about how we could do this in a meaningful way to move forward. Our vision is to have a rapid response parking enforcement aide who can go out to the parking violation calls that come in. I think one piece of friction that we're hitting up against now, and this is like a reality as you get into the nitty-gritty details of the work, is like the territorial issue. We have seen that right now, parking enforcement aides safely write tickets for all different types of parking violations. We are getting some pushback from the police department about what types of parking violations they currently want to see in there. They're very comfortable and excited about the idea of taking off things like permitting. You know, if you're parked in the wrong permit spot, they're happy to see those off their plates and they're willing to compromise for that. But they're less comfortable taking off their plates around, like if you're parked in a fire lane or other types of parking hazards. And so, you know, it really becomes, I think where these conversations that we're having right now, the collaborative conversations are really helpful, is having the opportunity to have these departments think creatively and think outside of the box. I heard of a lot of people talking about the lack of imagination that's happening, and these things are all really possible. We just need to be creative. We need to think of different ways of doing it, and so we are really trying to push the departments to think outside their box and how we can be creative in doing these situations.
I want to come back to you about sort of sticking points and pushbacks, but before that, I'm just curious to get a show of hands. What jurisdictions or folks from jurisdictions here are either actively thinking through or wanting to think through parking enforcement as part of alternative response? Put your hand up if you're thinking about that. Okay, not too many. Not too many. So this is interesting. Like, let's get those juices flowing about parking enforcement. Tell me a little bit about the demographics of the districts that you're looking to pilot this in, and maybe say a word about, you know, I assume that if you're going to tackle this issue, that there's going to be sort of a surge of enforcement, and what does that mean for those community members, and I guess how do you think about avoiding, as a result of this, kind of overtaxing potentially, you know, historically marginalized communities? What's the thought process there?
Yeah, that's for sure important. We don't want to place more burden on already burdened communities. One thing about this partnership, so we partnered up with a counselor in the 8th District. Politically, we have very, very different views on how things should be done as far as policing. But what's interesting to me is that we all come together on this like one very narrow topic, but it just shows that there's a lot of support for the idea of police shouldn't be the ones responding to these calls. Both of our districts are the two biggest districts in the city. So we have a wide variety of people who live in our districts. And I think one of the things that is really important to us is, as we move forward with this pilot project, is to make sure that we have a good evaluation done of it, so that we can understand what the impacts are, who is being most affected by it, and really make sure we're avoiding those types of results that you're talking about. But we're also not trying to increase enforcement in any way. We are just trying to make sure that the police aren't the ones having to respond to that. These are still calls that our police department goes out to all the calls that come in through 911. We're just saying that these aren't the right people to be doing it. So we're really not trying at all to increase parking enforcement. We are also really trying to change behavior so that people know ahead of time. We want to make sure people are aware of the program so they know ahead of time that this is happening, but that they learn new parking behaviors, because parking enforcement, parking in handicapped spaces, parking in crosswalks, that is dangerous, and that does cause real public safety issues.
Yeah, and I think changing behavior is often the hardest part and potentially the most overlooked part of this work. So I'm glad you lifted that up. I want to go and talk about, it's no secret, Chicago is the third largest city in the country, massive scale, 77 or something neighborhoods, micro neighborhoods, each have their own personality and series of issues. And I think that's another reason why the sort of district councilor breakdown is really important from a perspective of advocating for the unique needs of each neighborhood. But I want to hear from Arturo and Matt about how it's possible, how it will be possible to scale care, right? Care can't possibly be on every block at every time, and there's a limitation to how many calls care has been able to respond to so far. So how do you scale crisis response for such a massive and complex city?
Well, you do it carefully, you do it in partnership, and then you learn as you go, right? This is the complexities of crisis response in the third largest city. It's been piloted multiple times, so every one of those pilots came with a lot of lessons. Those lessons get incorporated, those lessons get reassessed, and then we continue to monitor as we scale up. So we know full well that we're scaling up right now citywide with 8 vehicles citywide. And we know that's just the beginning of what's going to be, if we're doing this effectively, the opening up of a valve that will then kind of bring in more and more social needs. One of the biggest changes that we kind of went underreported in our announcement of citywide expansion was that we also worked with the State Department of Public Health to incorporate social emotional distress as part of the screening question, broadening it from what was previously just mental illness crisis. Right, and so knowing full well that people were being disqualified because of that limitation, that there's not a diagnosable situation, but if somebody's hungry and irate in a grocery store, and we heard those calls in some of these workshops, right, couldn't that be considered social emotional distress? Because it's not mental illness, right? So thinking about how, as we kind of turn a valve open and then we monitor, how do we reassess and reconfigure as we go is kind of the approach that we're taking. The other reality is that now that we're going citywide, it's going to touch every one of the 50 wards. That's right, Chicago has 50 wards, so there's 50 elected officials. And every one of those elected officials now will have an opportunity to interact with care. Well, think about the political buy-in that creates. It creates an opportunity for elected officials now to be accountable to their constituents about this public service that should be delivering the resources. And so that creates a different opportunity, right? How do we create the revenue stream? And there's going to be a panel later today at 1 o'clock talking about that, and we'll have a policy director there, chief policy officer, to talk about then how do you create the dedicated revenue to make this, again, part of our lasting infrastructure. Another major change that Mayor Brandon Johnson did, and he doesn't get credit for this as much as he should, is that care was built on federal relief dollars, ARPA dollars. This past budget year, it all got incorporated into our corporate budget. So it becomes part of the permanent budget, and something that, again, as we're expanding to all 50 wards, now all 50 aldermen and all 66 district councilors will have skin in the game to make sure that this is successful. And how do we grow from there? And how do we build from there? So, as we are currently thinking about expanding citywide, we're also seeing that as the work that Matt Richards and Tiffany were part of in shaping and understanding what the initial pilots look like, we could learn from that data. And we see that evening hours was where highest volume was also reported. So we're incorporating that into our expansion design moving into the rest of this year. So again, pulling from the previous lessons, developing new metrics, assessing those metrics, creating new opportunities to learn, and that iterative process is literally how we're having to do it.
I mean, I've worked for 2 different mayors, and now I work for President Preckwinkle, and I'm really just focused on advancing the work. So the things that we learned in the Lightfoot administration, internal things, I share that stuff readily with Arturo, right? Because I'm about getting the job done. I think practical things are, you need to look at your call volume. How many call responses are you getting at the zone of dispatch, whatever that zone is? Is it a police district? Is it a fire zone? What are the pathways the team takes to get to the call? Is it 911? Is it first responder assist request? Is it their self-dispatching? I want to see the numbers for all 3 pathways. And then we need to have regular meetings with all of the agencies. Even if there's not a police officer on your team, I need the police officers on the patrol teams asking for assist. So these teams take over the call. And you need to have the chief of staff or the mayor convening those meetings with those agency leads, because I'm a therapist by training. Large bureaucratic entities do not welcome change.
Understatement of the day.
Right? The speed of organizational inertia is a powerful one. Change management requires push. So I welcome community advocates pushing us. I don't take that personally. Push away. Hold us accountable. And then inside government, we need to have accountability conversations about the policy agreements we've reached. We need those police assist requests. We need the fire assist requests. I need to have police radios in these vehicles so that the team can self-dispatch to calls out in the field. So you have to monitor that stuff very carefully in terms of the data, and then you have to hold all of the agencies inside government accountable. And that's the way you get it done. And start with a certain number of districts and scale up. Because as Arturo said, you learn a lot as you go. One of the things we saw was, you know, if you can't get there if you don't get there within 10 minutes, a third of the people are already gone. Right? You guys know that, right? So you've got to start thinking about time to scene. That's an incredibly important metric. That's just an example of something we learned as we went.
I think that's helpful framing and also a good segue. Matt, you said it, not me. Push away. So, you know, I kind of want to understand the promise versus the reality, and I want to come to Jessica and Tiffany to sort of give us an understanding of what the expectations of care are right now and whether Chicago is meeting those expectations. Is Chicago meeting the moment right now? What does that look like?
So I see two things that are the flip side of each other. And the first is a lack of awareness of resources, and the second is limited hours. But to the first point about lack of awareness, so NAMI National had a report recently that said 75% of Americans, they don't know what 988 is. And in my experience talking to people, the vast majority of them, even the most civic-minded groups, they don't know what 988 does, and far fewer people know what mobile crisis response is. That's a foreign concept to people. And some people in power have used low usage rates as an argument for not funding these programs rather than getting the word out, educating the public. So as an analogy, this was a very long time ago, so don't laugh at me, but this was before DoorDash and Instacart and all of that, and I was living alone, and I have a mobility disability. So when I would go grocery shopping, I would only get like 2 things at the most, because that was all I could carry. And sometimes people would look at me funny, like, you only need 2 groceries? And it's like, no, I just can't carry more than 2. And then one day my cousin's like, why don't you do online grocery? Why don't you have them deliver? And I was like, what? That this exists? That was a foreign concept to me. So a lack of awareness of an essential resource should not be interpreted as the people don't want this thing. And then to the flip side, the limited hours, that's an issue that discourages use because you can't control when crisis happens. And that's why I'm thankful that Tiffany had said it when she said, we needed a room, but they gave us a corner.
Tiffany, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, so the expectations, during the course of the build out, we were given data points. The fire department said, oh, we have all of these thousands of calls. The police said, oh, we have all of these thousands of calls that would be eligible for your program. And that information went out widely. So when we got started, it was like, oh, we about to be busy. I mean, we expected to blow up so fast. When I tell you the trickle, it was like drip, 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 drip. Drip. And it was very much this pattern, and everyone's like, well, what are you doing wrong? Well, and that was the we have to be doing something wrong. The pressure was, if we're not getting all of these numbers, we're doing something wrong. What people did not know is that we're in this corner. No one wants to share with us. The 911 system didn't trust us, and we talked about this on yesterday, being able to build trust with the people that dispatch us. So now we have to work with our 911 center to build trust within them so that they want to dispatch us. Now we have to build trust within the police department so that they want to share a scene with us because they're concerned we're going to get ourselves killed. We still haven't built this trust with the fire department. They still have a little bit of, salt and vinegar on us right now, and they're not sharing the space. So the expectation that everyone would share and welcome us, because it makes sense. We keep hearing, you're so needed, you're so needed. We don't want to do it. It's not our lane, it's your lane. But then you don't move over and let us merge in. So how is it, it's not our lane. It can't be because you won't let us in. So now it's, let me, throw some bowls. Let me take up some space in these rooms. Let me say the uncomfortable things out loud so people understand we are actually here. We do mean business, and we're not going anywhere. And yes, things were great for a while. We started the new process, the new model with the EMTs and the clinicians. Everything's going good. We're on track, 100 calls per month. My team was hungry. They were out in these streets. Anybody that they thought could have needed something, they got something. So please go look at the care vans. Shameless plug for my vans. Please go look at the vans so you can see how they were giving people things and helping the community. But also within that space, now we have the police saying, oh, wait, slow down. You're using our technology? What? You knew we were using it before the police came off the model. Now you say we can't use it again? Everything stops. Full stop, not a slow stop, full stop. Stop using everything, numbers dwindle. And now we have community looking back at us saying, what are you doing wrong? When we didn't do anything. But we are the ones that are taking the accountability, taking the blame, when it's the system that's not, the system and the infrastructure that was never built for us to begin with. So now we are working with our agencies again, sister agencies again, to get the infrastructure back in order. No one understood that the system was not designed for us. We're coming into a space that was never ours. And we're saying, you want us here, we want to be here, there's a need, let's work together. Not everyone wants to work together. And adding this conversation about the police and the unions. And now it's, am I stealing work from these people? Am I stealing work from those people? Call types are work. So are we stealing work? EMTs versus paramedics. Are you stealing work? We're a heavily unionized town. So are we stealing work? We've gone through one litigation already over stealing work. Just so that we could do the job. That everyone says, this is your lane. You should be doing this. But you don't want to let us in. So that's that piece.
I wish that were, give it up for Tiffany and CARE. I wish that were the only, that's enough of a hurdle, but I wish that were the only one. But we all know elections happen. Yep. We all know that there are transitions. We just had a transition in New York, so we're no stranger to it. Chicago, maybe not a transition, but Chicago's definitely having an election in February, and maybe a runoff, mayor, alders, all of that. And all of you who have been working on these issues for a long time, and before the current administration, and I'm certain that regardless of what happens, folks will be working on CARE's success and the expansion of alternative response in the future. But how do you, and I want to stick with Tiffany and maybe Sully if you want to jump in as well, how do you all account for leadership transitions? How do you account for political shifts? How do you account for even, you spoke about needing to sort of, Jessica actually spoke about needing to sort of help people understand the literacy. How do you account for the changing narratives around public safety?
I want to start by thanking Matt. He's my boss. I still think he's my boss because I still call him. And Matt said something to me at the beginning of all of this, me not knowing how political this role was. I am a social worker through and through, and that is how I introduce myself. And Matt said to me, we serve at the pleasure of the mayor. And so when the mayor comes in and he has a different vision of the work, at no point did I think a mayor of the third largest city would directly impact what I do every single day. the people that I work with every single day. So the culture shock for me, coming from community mental health and then sitting in this space, and Matt's like, yeah, the mayor said the police and the fire department are coming off the model and we have to rebuild this. I was like, what? Really, Matt? Matthew? All of the things? Like, are you kidding me? And why is the mayor that invested? Why does he care that much? And he should care that much. And that was me having that self-reflection that he should care that much about the constituents and about the people that he serves. And so the adjustment of serving at the pleasure of the mayor was very big for this social work brain to have to figure out how to pivot and how to lead my team through a pivot, because they didn't expect that either. We came in with a mindset, what was pitched to us as a model that we were going to do and bring to fruition, vastly changed in a system that the mayor made the change but didn't change the system, so we still have to work in the same system that he making changes in. It was insane. It was insane, it was uncomfortable, but the thing that I can say and thankful for is friendship and understanding that the people that we really were working with, my 911 partners, my CPD partners, Lieutenant Anderson's back there and her team, the work that we did during the pilot with the CIT docs officers, with the mobile integrated health paramedics, they were still family to us. They did not let us go. They understood we still had work to do, even though they were pulled off the model. They still supported us. They still went in rooms before us and made space for us. They still did all of the things. So making friends along the way, networking, partnering, understanding shared vision, shared dreams, understanding that we know what we need and they're on the ground, we're on the ground. We were able to share space, take up space together and move things forward. Even in those down moments, they still held us up and they still called on us, gave us referrals. They still made sure we worked when the rest of the system was letting us go.
You want to jump in, Sully?
Yeah, I think that the, you mentioned like we have an election in February. All of our district councilors are also up for re-election or election in February of next year. So 66 district council elections. And I think, I don't know the exact, is it 35? It's a majority of the district councilors that have endorsed the Treatment Not Trauma campaign to expand care to 24/7 service, add more vans, to have like real citywide service. And a majority of district councilors have signed on to that campaign, and that's really important because again, like these are the elected officials who are most in touch with the on the ground public safety concerns with their community, and they're speaking on this, right? And the re-election of a cohort of district councilors that are similarly strong advocates for this after February is really important. Because, like I said, like their voice is really critical in this space. And I think like one of the things I'm also been thinking about as we've just sort of been talking about, like the sort of the political turnover and the relationship between community and like these institutions is, so like I am like a third or fourth generation GAPA coordinator with this coalition of campaigns to advance this work. And a lot of the initial folks who pushed hard and organized to pass the ECPS ordinance are now themselves district councilors, or are now themselves commissioners, or are working for the city in other ways. And that's great. They're the people that like if you could at the time have picked anyone that you would want to be like who like understands this and wants to fight for it. Those are the folks, a lot of those folks are in now, which is really exciting. And I think that, and present a real opportunity for like keeping this through line of like, how can we keep community and movement in these spaces where like we are like developing and cultivating these institutions and like developing this like really exciting experiment in public safety. And one thing that Matt said earlier that I really want to highlight is you're saying a lot of great stuff over here, Matt. Is not resenting the feedback from community. Community coming to public meetings is really important. Community, and particularly in this space when it comes to policing, and community safety. People are bringing lived experience to these meetings, are bringing trauma to these meetings, and are sharing their stories. And we have a really complicated ecosystem of public safety and police accountability in Chicago. It is a very complicated ordinance, and community, are interacting with it in the way that they can, when they can come to these meetings and present, and making sure that that feedback and that, and the tension that community have with institutions is sort of understood, I think is really important, particularly for folks who come from organizing, who come from the community, who come from movement. Community interacting with these institutions is not personal, right? Like, these things are slow and they are hard and they are complicated, and community can be frustrated about that. And their feedback is really important in that space, and it's really important that we listen to that. I just think that it's like one of the things that like we continue to sort of struggle with, particularly with like these like newer institutions around police accountability, that we like want to make sure that we are being generous and thoughtful about the ways in which community shows up to spaces, because it's really critical that we like stay engaged in that space in a really genuine way.
So I want to build on something you said, which is, 35 or whatever the majority number is of the district counselors have signed on to the treatment, not trauma, promise to expand. That's phenomenal. And I want to hear from Jessica and maybe you, Sully, and really anyone on the panel at this point. We've got 5 minutes left, so jump in as you wish. But that's great for the purpose of winning an election. What happens after? And how do you make sure that there's accountability for the folks who said, we want to support this? Okay, so now we've gotten you in for another term or whatever. How are we going to make that a reality? And I mean, that's the job of advocates to some degree, and the media as well, I would hope. But how do you stay on top of those folks who have made that commitment to ensure you're seeing that change afterwards, after the election's over?
I think it's about transparency and making sure that people know what's going on and understand the work that's happening behind the scenes. And that is one thing. Thank you, Tiffany, for the amazing shout out. I feel also equally lucky to have that relationship with you where we can talk about these things, because we can go into the spaces and really problem solve. And I appreciate the mayor's office for also inviting district councils and community to be part of the planning process and understanding of what's going on with the implementation of the CARE program, so that we can report that back out to community, because ultimately community has the power and community is the one that needs to know what's going on in order to continue these programs.
I think related to transparency is making it personal. So we met with an alder and we talked about the need for better resourcing for a certain program. And we had a psychiatrist there, and she was saying that she calls the program from time to time, this hotline, to see if it works, because she directs her clients to use it. And she said, every time I call, I get sent to a voicemail. And they tell me to leave a voicemail, and then they never call me back. And I'm worried, what if somebody that I'm helping is in crisis and there's nobody to pick up the phone, or they just leave a message. So I think making it personal, adding that human element to those numbers.
I mean, I think the data transparency is really, really important, that you're dashboarding your data and making it really easy for people to see not only like total responses, but percent of eligible calls that the teams are going on. I grew up in Durham, North Carolina, so Durham's in the room. We love your dashboard. A number of you guys have great dashboards.
Big shout out to dashboards.
We did a data dashboard. I mean, there were some really practical reasons for FOIAs and things like that. There's so much FOIAing of this data. You can just direct people to the dashboard. But after the campaigns are over, you need to have an agreement about what are the metrics of success, and you need to be able to drill it down to the level of a unit that's connected to the elected official service area. So a district counselor, an alder person, right? Because they are the folks that you're gonna call. Like if I'm in the 19th Police District, I need to go out to my 19th District Commissioners and say, these teams are going to 3% of the eligible calls. What is going on, right? So I think that's part of what the accountability looks like. I think as we head into the campaign, I think making sure that all the candidates commit to continue the program. So I really hope that organizers hold people's feet to the fire on that. The mayor's continued the program, and as Arturo said, I think his decision to put it on the city budget he deserves a lot of credit for that. That was a heavy lift. So we need to make sure that anybody who's serious commits to that.
All right, we have like 3 minutes left. Let's see if we can. Oh, Sully, did I interrupt you?
I was just going to say like one brief thing about you mentioned the media, and I think that like storytelling also is like really important piece here. And I've been thinking a lot about that TV show we all learned about yesterday. I think that's a brilliant idea, and I think that
Where's Tansy? Tansy here? Shout out to Tansy.
It's brilliant, and I think that like what gets covered is, and like what we see on TV, and like who's creating that narrative, and like what narrative is compelling, is a struggle with this project, because like like the things that get covered are like the consent decree isn't in compliance, or like we can't get enough money into the CARE program, or just like the way that community violence is covered in the news, right? Like what doesn't get covered in the news is the countless times that community violence interrupters have like worked together in a neighborhood to stop things before they happen, right? And that is a huge victory and a huge missed opportunity for us to be talking more about that in public ways and in public spaces, and to create stories around that. That's just like community violence, but like alternative response too. And I think that working with our media partners or working with storytellers to try to come up with ways for us to tell these stories in compelling ways, I think can really help to sort of like grow and shift this narrative around like how we can like take care of each other. And I've been thinking a lot about it in regards to the election as well.
Tell the stories. Okay, one last question. We've got less than a minute left, so I just want to hear some quick thoughts from anyone who wants to jump in, maybe two folks. We are here in your city. We're here in Chicago. Thank you for having us. How can we help? What can we do to contribute to Chicago's success?
I would say for me, keep answering my phone calls and my emails when I call, asking, how did you do that? What words did you say? Because I lean on you all. This is the movement, but this is my community. I go back to my team, and I'm thankful that my team so I have team members here so that they can see that they are not alone. We feel siloed when we go back home. So answer the phone, answer the emails, because we're calling each other, trying to figure out how did you get there? And it's that little inch. Well, I want to go an inch too. How did you get there? And we are pulling and pushing each other forward as we need to. So just keep responding to us when we call.
Give us one more. Who has another one?
I echo that, yes. We're making connections here. I've already heard from Chicago participants here that we want to debrief and have a report out so we could all share, compare notes, share lessons learned. And yes, absolutely, the networks that we're creating with you all are lessons that we're drawing on. And again, any way we could be helpful. Prior to being in this role, I visited Portland. I've been to conferences where we were discussing Albuquerque. We brought in experts to testify in city council from Albuquerque about their model, Denver on their model. Evanston's in the room, we're learning from them, right? So these connections for us, absolutely, we're applying them here. And again, however we can support in your municipalities, also reach out to us.
Love to hear that. Chicago's big, but not too proud to learn from other cities. And getting around and seeing how everyone else is doing what they're doing is super important as well. Please join me in thanking this illustrious Chicago panel.